Very good afternoon. UATV English is online and on the air. My name is Henry Keane, as usually, doing my best to bring the hard truth in easy terms for you. Tonight we have guest Dr. Frank Ledwidge, Senior Lecturer at the Royal Air Force College and a former military intelligence officer, with us. Dr. Ledwidge, hello.
Hello there, Henry.
Once an intelligence officer, always an intelligence officer. Do you agree?
No, I definitely don't. I've been
Uh,
on the wrong end of that in pretty much every country I've been for the last 10 years, and including Ukraine, by the way, where
right.
it's assumed that I was doing one thing when in fact I was doing something quite different. It may be the case, I think, to be fair, in some nations. Look, who's going to believe me? But as far as I know, both on the
Right.
civilian side and the military side, it's not true for the Brits, genuinely, as far as I know.
All right. Well, as far as you know, Israel is superior by far. So what's the point for Iran to escalate the situation? Well, just took me through briefly because I don't understand it, absolutely. Are they stupid? Of course, they're reigned by terror, they are a terrorist country and blah, 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 and so on. But they can't be that stupid. Sorry, forgive my language, but that's true. So why to escalate? What's the point?
I think we tend to underestimate Iran as a strategic power. You're quite right. From a military perspective, Iran is relatively weak.
Hmm.
It can't do very much. If we want to get into the weaponry, it's mostly 1980s, 1970s gear modified. They've got some capabilities in the maritime domain, most of them quite unconventional. But I think the power, which is very significant, rests not in its conventional capabilities and arsenal, which we saw demonstrated, of course, a couple of months ago when all of the drones except one were shot down by Allied forces, fired by around 300 of them, and indeed missiles. It doesn't lie in that domain. What it lies in, much more importantly, is the effect and the strategic effect it can have in the region and actually more widely. So, for example, its proxies are extremely strong militia, especially in Lebanon, which perhaps we can get onto with the Hezbollah group, about which I know something, but also about which I know less, the various militias in Iraq, which can cause a great deal of trouble to Iraqi politics and also to the remnant Allied forces there in the form mostly of American
Right,
troops.
right, right.
Same as the case in Syria, by the way, where there's also a military presence of Western troops. But again, at that grand strategic level, where Iran to engage its proxies and allies, you then tend to draw in the Sunni powers, because much of this is proxy religious, such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and perhaps even more widely. So that's the impact that Iran can have, more strategic and political through its proxies than military in a direct sense against Israel.
Right. So, are you saying that this is more like a call for all the radical forces in the region, anti-Semitic forces, obviously, to join
Yeah,
and to
yeah.
just destroy Israel? Is that right?
There's no chance of destroying Israel, as you well know. But what the whole grand strategic aim of this is decadal. You know, the way they look at it is Israel is a settler state. It's a crusader state. We destroyed the last crusader states. Took 100, or in that
Right.
case 200 years, but we did it in the end. And this is the same kind of long-term, long durée process. And it's not so much it's motivating or energizing. It's simply directing. And the most dangerous by far, which is genuinely dangerous to Israel in the immediate sense, it is Hezbollah, which is an Iranian proxy. But we'll get to that, I think. So yes, that's the major risk. And of course, from the U.S. point of view, and the more let's say the Western perspective, what they're desperate is for the various initiatives over the last decade or so, notably the Abraham Accords, which President Trump initiated and carried through, are not compromised. I think they are terminally compromised, but they're still trying to keep them alive. And the Abraham Accords, of course, is the process of recognition by countries like the UAE, which has already done so, United Arab Emirates, but
Right.
much more importantly, Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia Saudi Arabia has no interest in this conflict. Frankly, having lived in parts of the region for many years, a long time ago, I don't think many Arabs in that region have much time for the Palestinians and regret the fact that they ever got involved with them. But there we are. The point here is that that Saudi's desperate to normalize the region for its own economic reasons. So are the other countries, to be fair, at the higher levels. And this kind of thing presents a terminal danger to that process of normalization. Right. And that the end of that process will be initiated by Iran.
All right. Well, where's Russia's place in all this?
Oh, Russia's enjoying this immensely because it provides. I mean, it depends how deeply you want to get into. I mean, to some extent, I think we give these countries too much credit with their grand conspiracies and evil machinations. It suits Russia, of course, to have the US and the West diverted from the main effort at the moment, which is Ukraine. It suits Russia for oil prices to be high, and of course, a conflict in the Middle East would drive them up. It suits Russia for customers such as India and China to look to it for its fossil fuels rather than the Middle East. Now, there are counters to that. For example, the US could increase its supply to its own customers. But look, Russia's objective is to keep itself going. It was said a long time ago in the 1970s that the Soviet Union, as it was in those days, was Burkina Faso or I can't remember what it's called, and Burkina Faso with a gas station attached. It's a poor country with no major industry, but with immense reserves, and that remains the case in principle. So, come back to the point. It very much suits Russia for oil price to be driven up, its own revenues to be topped up, and capable of continuing itself as a going concern. So Russia's watching this, with interest and some glee, I should think, at the higher levels.
So with gas station attached, I loved it back then, and I love it now. But do you believe that some people say it's a conflict? Journalists say it's a conflict. Do you believe it will go further onwards to an open war, to combat clashes, and a full scale? Whatever is going to happen is going to be a full scale war between Israel and Iran.
So I was asked this last week, and then I said no, and I'll tell you why. So I've lived quite a long time in Lebanon, and used to know it quite well, less so now. And Lebanon is the home of Hezbollah, but it's also the home of 3.5 million Lebanese people, who generally speaking, most of them on all sides see Hezbollah as their proxy defense force, whether we like it or not, including Christians. And they would say, and I think they'd say now, we don't want this war because we know what's going to happen to our country. Christians, Shia, Sunni, Druze, and the other groups would all unite and say, we don't want Beirut to be trashed again. We don't want the south to be ruined. We don't want our infrastructure destroyed. Our economy is already in the basement, and we can't afford any that to happen again. I think that most Lebanese would say that, but the importance of this is not because it's a democratic country. It certainly isn't. It's that Hezbollah derives its support from its own people, the Shia people, but also many other Lebanese. And so they have had an eye to that, and they're very clever leadership in the form of Hassan Nasrallah and his lieutenants, many of whom have been killed, by the way, over the last 8 months or 10 months. And they've been quite cleverly calibrating their conflict with Israel. However, the killing of Hania last week, I think, changed in Tehran, of all places,
right.
Changed the dynamics. And it may well be now that Iran will take over giving the orders, and Hezbollah will simply have to follow them, and we'll see where we get to. So the answer to your questions, from my perspective, which isn't worth no more than anybody else, looks to me that we are on once again an escalatory path. Now, here's another thing. When you speak to Israelis, particularly Israelis who are very engaged in politics, they say, look, the reason this has got this far with respect to Iran and Hezbollah is because Netanyahu is desperate to remain in power. So we must look at the Israeli side. A lot of Israelis don't want this to go to war, and the reason is very simple. They don't, well, many reasons, but they don't want their country trashed by don't want their country damaged and to take quite significant casualties from a Hezbollah assault, which they certainly would. Right. Nobody's interested in that in Israel. And what they see is Netanyahu desperate to kick the can down the road of this war, because when that can stops rattling down the road, Netanyahu will be out in a heartbeat and he'll be in court for corruption. That's what they say. So there's that element as well. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's what they say. So it's a lot of tension against this escalation. But the dynamics, I think, are getting beyond people. That's what it seems to me, for what it's worth.
Right. Thank you very much for your expert opinion. But do you think Netanyahu is going to be out in a heartbeat?
Well, he would once. I think many Israelis, let's say all the Israelis I speak to, and all my friends who are engaged in Israel who are Jewish in the UK, many of them take a very close interest in all this, but also Israeli friends, they all say the same thing. Now, I may not be talking to the right people, but what they say is this war, once it finishes, Netanyahu's out because he's in serious trouble over corruption and cronyism and all that kind of thing. He's been under investigation for over a decade.
Right.
And they say, look, he'll be out. So there's a personal element in this as well, or so they say.
Amen to that. I can't hold myself from asking another question. It has nothing to do with Israel and the conflict or the war. As a lecturer of Royal Air Force College, F-16s in Ukraine, do you think this is a game changer? I don't think this is a game changer, but I have to ask this question. F-16s, to what extent these machines will help Ukraine?
Very good question. And I give the same answer that I've given for the last year and a half. The answer is not very much. And I think the Ukrainian government need to be careful with expectation management here. And let me explain why they won't make much difference. First of all, you're getting very, very few of them. Right now, there's somewhere between, I think, 9 and 12. That's not right. Between 6 and 10. And maybe fewer pilots, bizarrely. 8 pilots, I heard. Anyway, very few. There's not yet enough to form a combat flight of 4 or 6. It will take a long time, even for that, and a long time by that, I mean many, many weeks, for those aircraft to become integrated into Ukraine's wider effort. It's been made very clear, I think, by General Syrskyi and others, very sensibly, these aircraft will be used in the air defense role. So they will supplement the very successful but rather sparse Ukrainian ground-based air defense system at the moment, and they won't make a significant difference there, because what Ukraine needs are many more systems. My issue with the F-16s are many, not least that they're quite old. They're very exquisite. They take an awful lot of logistics and maintenance, which other aircraft don't. They require basing in, generally speaking, one place, which then becomes a target, which then itself needs to be heavily defended. Because for political and military reasons, the F-16 base, cannot be successfully targeted. So it needs to be very well defended. That draws defenses from elsewhere. So that's the first thing. The second thing, the F-16 is essentially it's just a truck for weapons, like every other military aircraft. So the key thing here is, what weaponry will it get? And in the air defense role, it's likely to get not the second rate, but the slightly less capable currently available missiles, versions of what's called the AIM or AIM-120, in addition to the short-range things, which it probably will only use against cruise missiles. So in other words, it's not going to solve immediately, perhaps in the medium term, the problem of the fab bombs, which Zelensky talks about quite a lot, and which, of course, are extremely damaging. So it won't solve that for a while, because before those aircraft are able to get to the zero line and above the zero line, to be able to make that, or to have that effect of pushing those SUs, Sukhoi 34s, back, they need to be sure they're not going to get shot down over the zero line, which in turn will require suppression of enemy air defenses. That requires different missiles, more aircraft, and by the way, taking a great deal of risk with those aircraft. That might be possible next year when the numbers rise to 20 or 30 and you can get a squadron together and you can integrate that into other systems.
Right.
However, one other thing, Henry, if I might, just 1 minute. The importance of this lies much greater, really, than its immediate tactical effect, the F-16s. And that's this: that what it does is wind Ukraine into NATO's primary air defense and air power systems for a long time to come, particularly US. So that's the first time this has happened. So actually, this is the first weapon system we've seen.
Absolutely.
Never mind ATACMS or HIMARS or various 155mm systems. Those are piecemeal and bits and pieces.
Right.
This is a system which hooks Ukraine into NATO very intimately. That's much more important in the medium and longer term. And it will create a basis for the Ukrainian Air Force to turn now its equipment, approach, training, logistics, maintenance, and everything else west rather than in rather haphazard way it's been dealing of necessity so far.
Exactly my point. So, Mr. Ledwidge, Dr. Ledwidge, thank you so very much for your time again and for your brilliant expertise. And stay an intelligence officer, so to just right.
Thanks very much, Henry.
Yeah, thank you so much. Heroim slava. Дуже дякую. It was Frank Ledwidge with us at UATV English. Stay tuned for more. Thank you. Goodbye.